Dear students, so let us continue the discussion of chapter 3, that is processes. So this is my second lecture on this chapter. So in the previous lecture we saw the basics of the processes, how exactly the processes will be used. So what are the different memory segments that are used by the processes and so on. So today we'll continue the same discussion. Okay, so we'll start the today discussion with the third point of this chapter, that is operations on the processes. So here we'll see what are the different operations that can be performed on the processes. So the first one is process creation. So how to create a process? So we know that the parent process is going to create the child processes, which in turn create other processes, forming a tree of processes. So that is there, because when one process creates the another process, the process that creates will become the parent process and the new process is called a child process. But in turn, that newly created child may act as parent to the processes that are created by it. So it is going to create a hierarchical tree. Okay, so the generally processes are identified and managed via process identifier. So in the previous lecture we saw, so while discussing I think a PCB, that is process control block, so the information with respect to the process identifier or process number is also stored, because we know that in the system you may have the any number of processes. So that's why it is very difficult for the system to deal with the processes with their name or the nature. So that's why usually processes are identified with the unique identification number given to each process. It is called as process identifier, that is PID. So when we have the number of processes, this PID is very helpful. And we saw that the process creation means who is going to create process. The process will be created by some other process only. Again, in the next discussion we'll see how exactly the processes will be created, what are the system calls that are used and so on. Before that, let us have some background discussion regarding process creation. We know that whenever a child process is created by the parent process, okay, so some amount of resources or some information will be shared between parent and child. So we'll have the discussion regarding this. Okay, so the first discussion is with respect to resource sharing. When a new child process is created, so how exactly the resource sharing will take place between the parent process and the child process. So for this there are three possible circumstances. The first one is parent and children share all the resources. In the first case, what we have is whenever a new child is created, so whatever the parents processes are there, all the processes are available to the child process. This is first possible way. The second one, children share subset of parents resources. So sometimes the parent don't want to share all the resources to the child. So here the parent process may share the subset of the resources that he is holding with the child process. Okay, and the third case is parent and child share no resources. Okay, in the third case, parent will just create a child process, but it will not allow the child process to share any single resource. So these are the three possible ways in which the resource sharing takes place between the children and parent. In the first case, whatever the resources are available with the parent, all are shared with child. The second case, the subset of the resources that are available with the parent will be shared with child. And in the third case, no resource will be shared from the parent to the child. This is about resource sharing. So next we'll see execution. Okay, because we know that one process is currently executing, and during the execution it has called the fork system call or some other system call to create a new child process. So here the question is whether the parent will continue the execution or the parent will go to the waiting state until the child finishes its execution. Okay, so that we discuss here. So again here also there are two possibilities. The first one is parent and children execute concurrently. Okay, so even though parent process have created a child process, the child is executing on its way and parent will also continue to execute on its way. Okay, so both will be executing simultaneously. and in the second case the parent waits until the children terminate. So in most of the cases this will happen whenever a parent process creates a child process. So in most of the time parent process will be creating a child process in order to complete one task. Okay, so here whenever a new child process is created, so that child process will be told to perform a particular task, and until that child process completes its execution, parent will be in the waiting state. Whenever child finishes its execution, the parent will continue its execution. Okay, so in this way the execution can be decided whenever the execution of parent it depends on the two cases. In the first case both will continue the execution. In the second case parent will wait until the child terminate. Okay, the third discussion is with respect to the address space, because we know that whenever a new process is created, every process will have its own address space. So what about the child process whenever a new process is created by the parent process? Okay, so here also we have the two things again. So the first one is child duplicate of the parent. Okay, and second one is child has a program loaded into it. So that's what based on this only you'll come to know how exactly the address space is shared. Okay, here although we know that whenever a new process is created it will have its own copy of address space, but the same thing is not true for here. So when the child process is created, we know that the child is the duplicate of the parent process only, and it will be executing in the parent's address space only. Okay, and we know that whenever a child is created, it is having a program loaded onto this which is to be executed. Okay, so again as I told you in the previous slide only, so to create a process, again there are some system calls that are available. So here we'll see the example system calls which are used on the Unix operating system. So on Unix system, a system call that is fork is called fork is used to create a new process. So a currently executing process, if it want to create a new child process, it should call the fork system call. So when fork system call is executed, it is going to create a new process. Okay, so when the new process is created, so merely creating a new process is not sufficient. So that child process should be given a task to be done. Okay, so in other words, the parent should tell that child to execute a particular program. Okay, so for that in Unix we have one more system call, that is exec system call. Okay, so this exec system call is used after a fork to replace the process's memory space with a new program. Okay, means here what happens, whenever a new child process is created, so that will it will be running, but it will be executing the part of the parent process only. But for what purpose we create the child process? In order to accomplish a particular task or in order to execute a particular program. Okay, so here to inform the child to execute a particular program, so we have to call this exec system call. Okay, so the same discussion we have here, the same thing is shown here. So what happens when the new process is created? So we know that in a currently executing process, when it calls the fork system call, a child process will be created. Okay, whenever child process is created, as I told you, in most of the cases parent will go to the waiting state. Okay, so here you see the parent is in the waiting state until the child finishes execution. So when child process is created, so it should execute a particular program. So for that, in the child space you have to call exec system call. So exec system call, it accepts the input the argument as the program to be executed. So when you pass this program name to this exec, the corresponding program will be executed as a part of this child's activity. So when child finishes execution, it calls the exit to exit the execution. So here when the child is going to exit, so it will be notified to the parent, and parent will come to know that the child has completed its execution, and after that it is going to resume its execution. So in this way the process creation operation is carried out. Okay, so after this we'll see a C program for forking a separate process. So we'll see one simple C program itself to demonstrate how exactly a new process will be created by using fork system call, and how that the child process is going to execute a new program. Okay, So here the program starts with the main function, that is int main we have. So after that, here we declare one variable PID of type PID underscore T. So it's a process identifier. Okay, so once we have this PID, so this is to store the PID of a newly created process, because we know that whenever you start executing this program, a process is created and that process itself will become the parent process whenever you create a new child process. Okay, so whatever the new child process you create, to store the PID of that new child process, we have this variable PID. Okay, so after this, to create a child process, you have to call system call fork. So that is done here. So we call the fork system call here. So that is fork. It will not take any arguments. Okay. So when you call this fork system call, it is going to create a new process, that is the child process. Okay. And it is going to return the PID of that new process. Okay. So here, whatever the value that this fork returns, so that will be copied into the variable PID. Okay. So here actually whenever you call the fork will be called once, but it is going to return twice. Remember this. Although fork is called once, but it is going to return twice. It returns some value to the child process also, and it returns some value to the parent process also. In the parent process, it will return the PID of the child process, and in the child process it will return the value 0. So that's why if you get the value of PID equal to 0, it is assumed that you are in the child space. Okay, and if the value of PID is greater than 0, you have to assume that you are in the parent process. Okay, remember this. Although you call the fork system call once, it is going to return twice. Once it returns to the child process with the value 0, and another time it will return to the parent process with the PID of the newly created process. Okay, so here whatever the program you are executing, so for this a parent process is created. So that's why in this parent process the fork will return what? The fork will return the PID of the newly created process, so that we copy in this. Okay, so after this, here you have to check whether PID is less than 0, because here what happens, we know that the PID should be either equal to 0 or greater than 0. Equal to 0 means child space, greater than 0 means parent space, but if it is less than 0, that indicates this fork is not executed correctly. Okay, so in that case, that is if PID is less than 0, we'll simply display the message as fork failed. So we have one standard function, that is a printf function, the file printf. So to store this message on the standard error file, and this will be displayed on the screen. As a result, you call exit -1 to halt this execution of program, and also to indicate the execution status as -1. Okay, unsuccessful. This is the if scenario. If this condition is false, we have else if PID equal to 0. As I told you, PID equal to 0 means it is the child process. If PID is greater than 0 means it is parent process. Okay, so in the child process, what you have to do, so if PID equal to 0 in the child process, you have to call the exec system call. Again, this exec comes with around 6 different variants. So out of that, here we have used the exec LP. Okay, so this exec LP takes 3 arguments. The first one is the path name. Okay, so here /bin/ls indicates the program to be executed. So here it is nothing but the execution of ls command. Okay, so here you want the child process to execute the ls command. So that's why you call the exec by passing the argument /bin/ls. Okay, so as a result, in the child process, the ls command will be executed and its output will be displayed. Okay, so after this we have else part. In the else part, this is nothing but the parent process. So in the parent process, what you have to do, you will simply call the wait function by passing null value. Okay, means parent will wait for the child to complete. Okay, so here whenever you call this wait, means the system will go to the waiting state, and whenever the child finishes its execution, that will be notified to the parent. So at that time, it will this wait will stop and it will execute the next line, that is printf child complete. Okay, after this it will execute exit 0 means your program will stop. So in this way you can write a C program to fork a new process, and you can make that new process to execute the ls command. Okay, so we'll see now we'll discuss the second operation on process, that is process termination. Okay. So here process termination may happen in two ways. Okay. So the child process may terminate itself, or the parent may terminate the child process. We'll discuss both here. Here first case we have the process to terminate its execution on itself. Here process executes last statement and asks the operating system to delete it. That is, it will call the exit system call, as we saw in our previous program. Means here process will be executing the program, and when it completes the execution of last line of that program, its task is finished. So after that it will call the exit function to inform operating system to stop its execution. So in this case, the output data from child to the parent will be sent through the wait. So that's what in the previous program I told you, that here in the child process the exec will be called to execute this ls program. So ls program line by line it will be executed. Whenever it executes the last statement, after that the exit function is called. The exit is going to terminate its child process. Okay, after that whatever the output that, or whatever the value that the child may want to return to the parent, that will be done through the wait. So that's why through this wait the parent will come to know whether the child has completed its execution. So that is what given here. The process executes the last statement and asks the operating system to delete it through exit. The output data from the child to the parent will be sent via the wait system call. The processes resources are deallocated by the operating system. They are very important, because we know that the resources are shared, and most of the time the number of processes will be waiting to acquire the resources if the resources are used by some other process. So that's why whenever you have the processes using the resources, when the use of that resource is over, that process, that resource should be compulsorily returned back to the system, so that it will be used by the other process waiting for that. Okay, so that's what the process resources are deallocated by the operating system whenever the process completes its execution. This is the first case where the process is terminating on itself. Okay, and as I told you, the second case is where the parent will terminate the process. Okay, so what are the reasons for terminating the child by the parent? Okay, so those things we'll discuss here. The parent may terminate the execution of children processes through the abort system call. Okay, the child process may call this exit to terminate normally, and when parent want to terminate the execution of child abnormally, it will call the abort system call. So there are again so many reasons because of which the parent may terminate the execution of child process abnormally. The first one is child has exceeded allotted resources. Okay, so if the child has exceeded the allotted resources, means whatever the resources that are allotted to the child, it has used those and it is exceeding the usage of that. So in that case the parent may terminate the child. The second one is task assigned to the child is no longer required. This may happen, like the parent may have created a child process to perform a particular task, but in between the execution the parent will come to know that, or the parent may think that actually that task is no more required. So in that case also the parent may terminate the child abnormally in between. Okay, and the third case is if the parent is executing. We know that whenever a child process is executing, at the end the child should report back to parent. Okay, because parent have created that child and it has told to execute a particular program. But there may be the situation like the parent itself is exiting, the parent itself is terminating. So if the parent itself is terminating, so there is no meaning of continuing the execution of child, because that the parent, for parent only the child will be executing. Okay, so in this case also the parent will terminate the execution of a child process. Okay, So here again some operating system do not allow child to continue if its parent terminates. So that's what again all children are terminated. That is called as the cascading termination. Because as I told you, when you create a new child process, that child may in turn become parent to some other processes. So that's why when one parent is terminating, so almost all its children should be terminated. It's a normal operation. Okay. So after this, next we'll see the fourth point of this chapter, that is interprocess communication. So interprocess communication, in short, it is also called as IPC. So what is this interprocess communication? As the name itself indicates, interprocess communication means this is the communication among the processes. So when we have the number of processes that are executing on the system, so there should be some mechanism in order so that the processes will be able to communicate with each other. Communication means it may be the exchange of information, exchange of or sharing of resources, and so on. So here next we'll see how exactly this is carried out. Before that, we know that whatever the processes we have in a system, the processes will be of two types. The processes may be the independent process or the cooperating process. Independent processes are the processes whose execution will not affect the execution of other processes, and the execution of other processes will not affect that process. Remember this, the name itself indicates independent means the execution of that process will be independent. The execution of that process will not be affected by the execution of other processes, and the execution of other processes will not affect the execution of this currently executing process. If this is the case, such processes are called as the independent processes. Okay. So the another category of process we have is cooperating processes. So this is the opposition of that independent. So cooperating means here when a particular process is executing, its execution will affect the execution of other processes, and also the execution of other processes may affect the execution of the present process. So these processes are called as the cooperating processes. So next we'll see the reasons for allowing the process cooperation. Okay, so for what reason we have to permit for these cooperating processes. Okay, again there are so many circumstances in which this may be required. Okay, so here we have just listed out here, that is information sharing, computation speed up, modularity, and convenience. So first one is information sharing. As at the beginning itself I told you that when the number of processes are executing, okay, so there may be some information that the number of processes may be interested in. Okay, or there may be some amount of information where every process will be requiring that. So in that case you can have the cooperating processes. Okay, because if the process is independent, so it cannot share any resource. Okay, because there will not be any effect among the execution of one another. But if you provide a environment for the process cooperation, so the information sharing is possible. Okay, so if some information is to be shared among the different processes, so that can be done here. So this is the first reason. Second one is computation speed up. Okay, the computation speed up means what? So we know that when in order to perform a particular task or to execute a program, you will be having a process. But sometimes the process may take long time, or it may require a lot of computational resources in order to complete that process or the execution of some activity. So in this case what happens, as you have the cooperating processes, whatever the task is to be done, the task itself can be divided into the small subtasks, and those subtasks can be assigned to the different processes, so that all the processes will execute the subtask in parallel, and at the end you will get the result in less time compared to executing that task by a single process. So this is the second reason, that is computation speed up. Third one is modularity. Modularity means what? Whatever the task you want to perform, if you want to divide that task into the number of modules, the module wise, because this is based on the nature of the particular activities. If you have the group of activities related to a particular entity, you can create a model of those activities, the module of those activities. Okay, so if you want to have the modular modules, so in that case also you can this may be the third this is the third reason for the process cooperation. The fourth one is convenience. Okay, so convenience means here we know that for individuals also, whenever the user is working, so instead of a single user, if we have the number of users that are number of tasks that are executing at the same time, so that will nothing but a very convenient way for executing a particular task. So for instance, whenever a user is performing some task of editing, at the same time he may perform the printing also, the compiling also, and so on. Okay, so these are the reasons for allowing the process cooperation, or providing the environment for the process cooperation. So after this, next we have the cooperating processes need the interprocess communication. That's what, because here the communication will be there, and in order to have the communication with processes, we need some mechanism. It is called as interprocess communication. So basically there are two models of IPC, that is interprocess communication. The first one is shared memory, and second one is message passing. So in this figure you can clearly see what are these two models. So this figure will tell you the communication models that are available. So as I told you, the first one is message passing system, and second one is shared memory system. So in message passing system, what happens, as the name itself indicates, when two processes want to have the communication. So here you just consider this is the memory. So we have kernel here, the memory. Okay, so after that we have process A and process B. Okay, so process A and process B want to have the communication with each other. So how this will be carried out? Through message passing technique or message passing system. So here what happens, the process A, when it want to have communication with process B, so it will send a message. It will create a message, that is yum, and that message will be sent to the kernel. Okay, that is first activity. So here when kernel receives this message yum, it will come to know that this message is to be sent to process B. So it will simply forward this message to process B. So this is second activity. So as a result, through kernel, process A is able to send information to process B. So this is nothing but message passing system. Okay, again in the next slide we will discuss these two models in detail. The second one is shared memory system. As the name itself indicates, a particular block of memory will be shared among the processes in order to have the communication. So here you can see we have kernel. After that, here we have process A, process B, and between process A and process B we have one more block of memory which is shared among both process A and process B. Means both process A and process B can access this particular memory block. Okay, so here when process A want to send some information to process B, what it will do, it will store that information to this shared block. So this is first activity. So when that block is stored here, so process B is going to read that block from this shared memory. This is second activity. Okay, so in this way also the communication will takes place between these two processes A and B. Okay, so this is how the communication models will work on message passing system and the shared memory system. Okay, so we'll discuss these one by one. So we'll start the discussion with the shared memory system. So in order to understand the shared memory system, let us visit on a classical problem of producer consumer problem. Okay, so the paradigm for the cooperative processes is the producer consumer problem, and we know that a producer means, as the name itself indicates, the producer process produces the information and that is consumed by the consumer process. Okay, again in order to implement the shared memory system, for this we have two approaches. One is unbounded buffer, another one is bounded buffer. As the name itself indicates, unbounded buffer means there is no any limit on the size of the buffer. Okay, because we know that in shared memory system a particular memory block will be shared among the two processes, and that block of memory which is shared among the processes is usually called as a buffer. Okay, so if there is a limit on the size of that buffer, we call that technique as the unbounded. If there is no limit, we call that as an unbounded buffer, and if there is a limit, means if the buffer size is fixed, it is called as the bounded buffer. Okay, so next we'll see how exactly a solution can be provided for this producer consumer problem by through the shared memory system. Okay, so here we have the implementation of that solution itself. So here first, as we know that you should have a shared data, means you should have a buffer which is shared among the processes. So for that we have these data structures. So first we define a constant buffer underscore size of value 10. Okay. So after that we declare one, we create one structure with the name item, and here we add all the data members. It depends on what information you want to store in the item. Okay. So after that, here we create one array buffer of the given size. Okay, and here it is of type item, because here the buffer is a temporary or the shared memory block which is shared among both the processes. Okay, so again it depends on the processes which type of information they want to store. So that's why the data type is of type structure item. So after that, here we take two local variables, that is in and out, which are initialized to 0. Okay. So here in indicates the location in the buffer where the memory block is free. Okay. And out indicates the location in the buffer where the memory block is filled. Okay. Means usually, just remember, in is used for writing and out is used for reading, because in is, it's like input. Okay, input means you want to write. Okay, so in means this will indicate where the buffer block is empty, and out indicates where the buffer block is full. Okay, and here the solution is correct, but can only use the buffer size minus 1 elements, because we have used the bounded buffer. So that's why we have the buffer size. Okay, so you can store at max buffer size minus 1 number of elements in this. Okay. So now let us implement the producer problem now, the producer process. So producer process, the code is very simple. We have an infinite loop here. There is a while true. So we have to produce an item. So after that you have while loop here. While in plus 1 mod buffer size equal to out, do nothing, because no free buffers are available. Because see here producer means it will be producing an item and it will be writing that item to the buffer. But when you want to write an item to the buffer, or when you want to store item to the buffer should have a free space. So that's why before you put that item into the buffer, you have to check whether the buffer is full, and the condition to check whether the buffer is full is this one, that is if in plus 1 mod buffer size is equal to out, the buffer is full. Okay, if the buffer is full, you cannot do anything. Okay, so you have to simply wait until the space is created in the buffer. Okay, so once this space is created, so this condition will be false. So when this condition is false, you can add an item to the buffer. So for that we have buffer of in equal to item, because in the previous slide itself I told you this in will indicate the free memory block where you can perform the write operation. Okay, so you have to, where you have to write at the location in. So buffer of in equal to item. Okay, so once you add this item, you have to increment this in value. So in equal to in plus 1 mod buffer size, because the value of this should not exceed the buffer size. Okay, and here one more thing, whatever this array we have used, that is buffer, okay, of buffer size to store the items. So this is implemented as a circular array. Circular array means what? So whenever the last element of this is stored, so again it will start searching from the first element to check for the free spaces. Okay, so this is how the producer process is implemented. So next we'll see how we can implement the consumer process. So what is consumer process? The consumer process is a process which will be consuming the data that is created by the producer. Okay, so in the consumer process, again we use the infinite loop here, that is while true, and here we check the condition whether the buffer is free, that is empty. If the buffer is empty, we don't have anything to be consumed there. So that's why here we cannot do anything there. So that's why here while in is equal to out, if in is equal to out, that indicates buffer is empty. Okay, and for the full, it is in plus 1 mod buffer size. If in plus 1 mod buffer size equal to out, the buffer is full, and if in is equal to out, the buffer is empty. Remember this. Okay, so for the consumer process, we check whether the buffer is empty. If buffer is empty, we cannot do anything, because we don't have anything to be consumed there. So we have to simply wait until some data is available on the buffer. Okay, so once data is available, So this condition becomes false, because when you add a new item, the in will be incremented by 1. Okay, so in that case in will not be equal to out. So at that time, so this condition becomes false, so it will execute the remaining part. So here we remove an item from the buffer, okay, because that is to be consumed. So we know that this out will indicate the location where the buffer is full, and in will indicate the location where the buffer is empty. So for the consumer side, in order to remove an item from the buffer, you have to write buffer of out. Okay, so buffer of out will give you the information, the item, so that is stored in the variable item. Okay, so once you consume this, again you have to increment the out value 1 by, so it is out equal to out plus 1 mod buffer size, and at the end you have to return the item which you have consumed. So in this way the consumer process can be implemented in C program. So this is about the shared memory system, the first IPC method. So now we'll see the second IPC method, that is message passing system. So as we saw in message passing system, the messages will be sent from sender to the receiver through kernel. Okay, so here a mechanism for processes to communicate and to synchronize their actions. Message system process communicate with each other without resorting to shared. This is known to you, because in the shared memory system a common shared buffer will be there between the two processes through which the communication takes place. But here in message passing system, no need to have any shared variables. A message will be sent without using any shared variables. Again here when you want to have this IPC facility to this message passing technique, so we have the two operations, that is send and receive. Okay, so when you call the send of message, the message will be sent. Receive of message means the message will be received. Okay, so again the message may be of fixed size or the variable size, it depends on the implementation. So here if the P and Q wish to have the communication, so first they need to establish a communication link between them, and after that they can exchange messages via send and receive. So that's what, in order to have the communication between the two processes P and Q, first they should establish a communication link between them, and after that they can send the messages through this send and receive system call. So after this we have implementation of the communication link. So again it depends on the approach that you are following. So the whatever the communication link that should be established between the two processes, again that communication link may be the physical link through the shared memory or hardware bus, or it may be a logical one through the logical properties. Okay, so when you want to implement this message passing technique, you have to answer some questions. So like how are the links established? Can a link be associated with more than two processes? How many links can there be between every pair of communication processes? What is the capacity of a link? Is the size of a message that the link can accommodate fixed or variable? And is a link unidirectional or bidirectional? Okay, so again when in this message passing technique, the communication will be again the two modes, that is direct communication and indirect communication. So now we'll discuss the direct communication. So direct communication means, as the name itself indicates, direct communication will take place between the two processes. Okay, so in this case you have to perform the naming explicitly. Naming means you have to specify the name of the process to which you are sending a message. At the same time, the receiver side also you have to specify from which process you are ready to receive the message. Okay, so that's why here in this direct communication method, the send and receive functions can be implemented here, operations can be implemented. The send of P comma message will send a message to a process P. Okay, so similarly receive of Q comma message will indicate that the process Q, the process want to receive a message from Q, that is receive a message from process Q. Okay, so in this case what are the properties of a communication link? So here the links are established automatically. A link is associated with exactly one pair of communicating processes. Means when a communication link is established, so that communication link is used only by these two processes P and Q. So no any third process can interfere the communication between P and Q here. Okay, After this, the between each pair there exists exactly one link, and the link may be unidirectional but is usually bidirectional. Usually it is bidirectional only. Unidirectional means what? Here we saw that the process P want to send a message to Q, so only the direction of transmission is P to Q, but sometimes the Q may also want to send message to P, so that's why it may be unidirectional, or most of the time it will be bidirectional. So this is about the direct communication. So after this we have indirect communication. So in this indirect communication, there will not be any direct communication with the two processes as we saw in the direct communication approach. Okay. So here in indirect communication, what happens? So we have something called a mailbox. Through this mailbox, the two processes will be communicating with each other. Okay. So here the messages are sent and received from the mailboxes. So these are also referred as the ports. So each mailbox has a unique ID, and processes can communicate only if they share a mailbox. Okay. So this is again some kind of the shared memory approach only. So where the shared memory system, we have a block of buffer which is shared among the two processes, but here we have a particular mailbox that is shared among the two processes. So when the two processes share a common mailbox, then only the communication will take place here, and here every mailbox will be associated with a unique ID, so which is to be mentioned by the processes which have to have the communication. Okay. So here let us see what are the properties of communication link in case of indirect communication. So in indirect communication, the link established only if the processes share a common mailbox. Very important, because if there is no any common mailbox between the processes, so the communication cannot take place here. So here it is not at all required to create a new link. Okay. Similarly, a link may be associated with many processes, because here whatever the link is there, the link may be used by the many processes, because we know that in order to have okay, because we know that in order to have the communication, both the processes should have the shared mailbox. Okay. And we know that mailbox will be shared between the two processes, so that's why here if the link is shared among the number of processes also, no problem. Okay. So the next property is each pair of processes may share several communication links. That is also possible. So here also the link may be unidirectional or bidirectional. Okay. So these are the properties of communication link in the indirect communication. Okay. So next we'll see what are the different operations that are performed in this indirect communication. So first you have to create a new mailbox. So after that, send and receive messages through the mailbox. After that, destroy a mailbox. Okay. So as I told you here, in this case you have to specify the mailbox through which you want to perform the communication. Okay. So here a process which you want to send a message should call the system call send of a comma message, where it is going to send a message to mailbox A. So after that, the another side receive process should call this one receive a comma message to indicate I want to receive a message from mailbox A. So in this way the indirect communication will takes place. So here again have some discussion, like if we have the mailbox sharing, like let us consider we have the three processes P1, P2 and P3 that are sharing the common mailbox A. And here out of these three processes, if P1 sends a message to the mailbox A, and let us consider both P2 and P3 have executed the receive with mailbox A, means obviously both P2 and P3 will receive a message P1, but P1 have sent a message to only one process, either P2 or P3. Okay, so that's why who will get the message here? Okay, so the possibility is both will get the message, but this is not recommended because sometimes the confidential message will be there, so it should not be leaked to the other process. So what is the solution for this? Okay, so the solution is you have to allow a link to be associated with at most two processes. Okay, so whatever the discussion we had here, so in the previous one, that is here in the properties, that the link will be associated with many processes and it will be shared among the different processes, so this should not happen. So you have to allow a link to be associated with only two processes. And second one is allow only one process at a time to execute a receive operation. So here we know that the P2, P3 have executed receive, so that's why both are able to accept this one. So you can have the restriction that only one process can call the receive. The third one is allow the system to select arbitrarily the receiver. Sender is notified who the receiver was. So that's what here the flexibility is given to select the receiver also. So this is about the indirect communication. So after this we'll discuss about the synchronization. So here the message passing may be either blocking or unblocking. Again there are two different types, that is blocking and unblocking. Blocking means the sender process will or the receiver process will be blocked for the next activities, but unblocking means non-blocking means here it will be allowed to carry out the other activities also parallelly. Okay, so that's what we discuss here. So blocking is considered synchronous, means whatever the blocking activity we have, that itself is called a synchronous, that is synchronization. Synchronization means this is a balancing thing. So here what happens in blocking send? So in blocking send means, as I told you, blocking send has the sender block until the message is received. So blocking send means when a process sends a message, that particular process will be blocked until the receiver is going to receive the message. Similarly, blocking receive means it has the receiver block until a message is available. Means here whenever it calls the receive, whenever it sends that receive particular message, so it will go to the block state until that message is received. Means here during this time it will not be allowed to perform any other task. So this is in case of the blocking. But if we have non-blocking, as the name itself indicates, along with this you can perform any other task also parallelly. So that's why here the non-blocking is considered as asynchronous. So in non-blocking send has the sender send the message and continue its other execution. Similarly, non-blocking receive has the receiver receive a valid message or null. So this is about the synchronization, that is blocking and non-blocking. So after this the last point is about buffering. So we know that the queue of messages attached to the link implemented in one of the three ways. So we know that whatever the link that is used between the two processes, so there will be a link, there will be a queue of messages that may be there. Okay, so how exactly this will be implemented? So again here we define the capacity, that is the first one is zero capacity, second one is bounded capacity, third one is unbounded capacity. In the zero capacity, as the name itself indicates, we cannot have any messages. The zero messages means the sender must wait for the receiver. So whenever sender whenever sender sends a message, so it should wait until the receiver receives that. Okay, so here we don't have any kind of storing, but in case of second one, that is in case of bounded capacity, so the finite length of n messages, okay, will be there, and sender must wait if the link is full. So that's what here the link itself will be having a particular queue, and here you have the fixed length for that queue. So here the size of that queue is n messages, means at most n messages will be there on that particular queue. So if the less than n number of messages are there, so sender will be allowed to send some more messages, okay, so that the link is full. But when the link is full, the sender must wait. Okay, so this is the bounded capacity. And in unbounded capacity, as the name itself indicates, there is no any limitation on the length of or the number of messages that will be there on the link. Okay, so here the sender is not going to wait, it will continuously send the messages, because whatever the messages that it sends, so almost all will be stored on the link until these are used by the receiver. So whenever receiver receives those particular messages, those messages will be deleted from the link. Okay, so even eventually the link will the number of messages that are associated to the link will become empty. Okay, so in this way this interprocess communication is possible, or this will in between the number of processes in order to have the communication with each other. Okay, so this is about the concept of processes. So with this we complete the chapter number 3, and in turn we complete module 1 also. Thank you.